Good morning, fish keepers. Cam here from the fishroom.co.nz. I hope we're all well. I hope we're all happy. It is the first Friday of December. No, last week was the first Friday of December. Second Friday of December. But we've got Friday. We've done doing coffee. Let's make it happen. It's not bad. I'm trying a new coffee. I'm okay with that one. I can accept that one. Right. We have got ourselves a guest today, so we'll bring up our lovely friend John. Good morning, John.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, thank you. And we have our guest, David Sanchez. How are you doing?
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Very good, thank you. So David is a hobbyist just like all of us. He is a tetra breeder or a fish breeder. So I guess we'll start this whole thing with, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into fish keeping?
Oh my goodness. I've been keeping fish since I was 8 years old. I'm 53 years old. It's hard to believe it's been that long. And it's kind of cool because I've seen so many changes in the hobby and in the technology especially. It's amazing how things have changed. Before, it was difficult to get to different things. Now you can order it on Amazon. So it's nice to see how the hobby has changed. It's really cool. So for me, it started with a fish bowl, of course. Believe it or not, I knew nothing about fish, and then quickly I read books and I learned, hey, this is really fun, and started learning all about fish and reading books. And one of the things that really inspired me were some of the books I read that were written by a lot of authors in Germany in particular. They were very meticulous. They were almost like scientists. And then I started keeping cardinal tetras and stuff like that. And back then it was, really difficult to get these fish, and they were touchy, and I had to collect rainwater. And I was just fascinated by how beautiful and the life cycle that a lot of these fish have in the Amazon is fascinating. Like cardinal tetras are actually annual fish. They'll only live a year, and that's it. So that's really blows your mind. But in an aquarium, they'll live 7 or 8 years. I've heard someone that'll live 10, and they get like 3 or 4 times the size of a wild cardinal. So it's amazing.
Cool.
Yeah. I only found out recently that cardinals were seasonal fish.
Yes.
And it changed the way I thought about them completely, because the question was raised that, are we plundering the live colonies out there for the sake of our hobby? But when you think about it, we're prolonging their life if it's done sustainably, and I think it's impossible not to, because most of them die off anyway. So,
yeah,
it really made me, it's food for thought.
That was a big thing for me too. To the point that the first question that you asked me on, actually one of the things that really got me into this when I was in high school, I went to the state science fair, and the paper I wrote was on spawning cardinal tetras, and the thesis I had was I wanted to sustainably breed them in captivity so that we wouldn't be, stockpile. Because I feel like I've been on that side of the wholesale, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of it. I've seen even if it's sustainable, I've seen the thousands of fish that die at the wholesalers and in transport and all these things. I much prefer sustainable people that are breeding fish, and that's what we see in Europe in particular. Germany, the Czech Republic, a lot of those states right close to they're breeding fish, and it's cold up there, but actually we're buying fish from them here in Florida because of the quality that they have. So the tank raised cardinals and stuff like that, they're coming in the United States, and we're getting them from the Czech Republic because they're tank raised. So I'm really hoping that that's what happens everywhere, that we're not going to be going to South America. Yes, it's sustainable. Yes, it's true. And I've read the papers and they're correct, but there's still that factor of the transportation and all the issues going there, to diseases. And it's, if you've been on that side and seen the death rates, it's horrific. And I hate to see that, and it breaks my heart.
I'm a massive fan of, as long as it's sustainable, I'm cool with it. But equally, like, it might be sustainable, but there's a large mortality rate and ridiculously high stress rate on the fish and that kind of stuff. So then you question, is that considered sustainable if you're getting so many issues and so much death in that process. So it's like a double-edged sword for me.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what I'm seeing here in Florida is a really cool thing. I've been in the hobby for so long, and I've been on the professional side too. Years ago, we started importing fish from the Czech Republic before it was common, and we were reselling it to wholesalers here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And we just, it just made more sense to get apistos and stuff like that from there. And what I'm seeing now is the wild fish and the tank bred fish are right about the same cost. So that's a good thing. So I'm hoping that, and then when you look at it, compare that you're going to get 100 wild fish and maybe half of them will survive. And then if you get 100 tank bred fish, well, goodness, now you're looking at 80% or more. So I'm hoping that is what we see going forward. That's certainly what we see in Europe, but here in the United States, yet the fish are so cheap coming from South America and everything. So I would like to see that change. I really would. I don't like that.
Have you fire away, John?
The topic of low cost fish and then that low value on a fish is something that Cam has brought up in lots of our live streams in the past, where when somebody spends a lot of money on a dog or a fancy cat or something, they see the value in that, so they want to do everything they can to give that the best life it can have. But when fish, a $5 fish or something like that comes into your care, it just doesn't hold the same value with a lot of people, and I think that is where their life becomes expendable and replaceable far too easily. So, yeah, I definitely agree with you on that, and the low price is always a problem.
I remember getting cardinals as a kid at the pet stores in New York City, 12 for $1. I mean,
wow.
People would use them as feeders. That's horrible. I mean, I remember hearing that. So I'm so glad that now, like to your point, they're $5 and $6 a piece, and you got to get 6 or 10 of them. So now there's an investment, a little bit of an investment there, and hopefully, I really like that people hopefully, investing more are going to give them that care and that time and everything. Versus, it's true, people put a monetary value on things, and it's sad. So hopefully we could just raise that awareness.
Mm-hmm. So
definitely.
We're New Zealand based, and you're saying $5 or $6 a piece for a cardinal. There'll be a lot of people going, "Oh man, that's so cheap." Because we're about $11 or $12 a fish for a cardinal tetra. But I think by the time you work out the exchange rate, that would probably be pretty close to be the equivalent of about the same price that we pay for a fish, give or take a little bit. So we're kind of around about the same point when it comes to that, just different currency, obviously. Yeah. Have you or do you notice any difference in coloration or different morphs between wild caught fish and captive produced fish over there?
Yeah, there's a big difference for sure. Like the Florida fish farms here are notorious for just breeding fish in ponds, and there's not a lot of control. There's just kind of a haphazard thing. And then over the years, what you'll see is absolutely degradation as far as the coloration. These fish tend to get sick faster because of the way they're raised. They're not resistant. Now, the opposite is true of the fish raised like in Germany and the Czech Republic. These fish and the fish I raise right here, after the third or fourth generation, I start to see, man, they're stronger. They're more resistant. Now, a cardinal tetra, they'll lay eggs at 6.5, whereas before, when I first had them wild, if the pH wasn't in the 4s, forget it, So it's amazing how fish evolve. But to your point, yeah, it's really important that you control things. So you got to be a little bit of a scientist here, not too much. You don't get too involved, but you really do want to control your lines. Like myself here, I have 2 lines of cardinals. The lines from Colombia are different from the lines from Brazil. The ones from Colombia have more red in them. And the reason for that is the red on them goes only to, I'm sorry, not the red, the the turquoise on them goes to the adipose fin. As you know, all tetras have the adipose fin on their back. So because of that, their appearance is they have more red. So I have the ones from Brazil are the ones that are most common.
Wow. I didn't
So
know
there's
that. Yeah, well, I was looking up Rummy Nose Tetras the other day, and I noticed there's 3 or 4 slightly different variants of them.
Yes,
we
there is.
tend to only get one, but even that kind of opened my eyes a little. Okay, cool. So there's a couple different variants of the one fish, and it's obviously the same with the cannels. So it's probably the same with many different species of fish. There's slight variations from catch points and stuff like that that make them a totally different animal. So, yeah,
Amazing. It really is. Yeah.
So back to the evolution you just sort of touched on, how 3rd or 4th generations are breeding in a higher higher pH than the wild caught ones. I was always under the kind of impression that evolution has taken millions of years to develop fish, or anything, to where it's at, and 2 or 3 generations wouldn't be enough to alter the requirements or alter the fish per se. But what you've obviously discovered or worked out is that it's a little bit longer in a tank raised environment, and that completely changes it.
Well, let me caveat that. I said eggs would be laid, not necessarily hatch.
Okay.
So even at the 3rd and 4th generation, we're still seeing. I have to use one of the things I have to use is phosphoric acid. This is very useful stuff. The pH has got, especially when you're using. When I was a kid, I was blessed. I had rainwater and I had a well, and the water came out of my well at a pH of 5.5 and 0 hardness. So naturally, fish from South America were just easy for you. It just made sense for me to start with those fish. Now I have to work hard at it. But no, sir. Even now, I'm at the 4th generation now from the wild now, and I still got to go to 4.5. But they'll lay eggs now, I'm surprised, at 6.5. Like they'll, in the tank, the community tanks, they're laying eggs. Whereas before, it wasn't until those conditions were very exact. So I'll probably see that change as the years go on. But just the fact that I'm even seeing them actively laying eggs at 6.5 is fascinating.
Very much so.
But I don't think the eggs have evolved to that point, because the eggs obviously have evolved in a very low pH, 0 hardness, and that is a different environment for sure than when you have that hard water.
So what was that? That bottle of acid that you had was sulfuric.
This is
for some reason for my head.
Yes, this is one of the tricks of the trade that I've learned from the breeders in the Czech Republic. I'm not going to take credit for this. Okay. Now here's what I'm going to say. The best way is to use Canadian sphagnum peat moss, but it's not sustainable. They're raiding the peat bogs and everything.
Yeah,
I have a bag of it. Okay. But that's the best thing. But it takes 2 weeks. You have to get patient. So when I was a kid, I used one of those old box filters, and I put the peat in there with the cotton on top, the kind of filter I'm talking about. And you put it in a tank, and 2 weeks later, the pH would be down to 4.5 or 5.5, somewhere in that range. It takes time. But this stuff here is amazing. Now, you got to be careful with this stuff, though. You got to have the tools to test your water. But this stuff is stable. This stuff is pretty good. But make sure that you get food grade stuff. And they use this to make like wine and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great way tip for people.
A lot of people.
Here, you can see it here. I don't know if you can see it here good. It's 10%.
Phosphoric acid.
Yes.
Not sulfuric.
Phosphoric acid.
Yeah. Sulfuric acid isn't really. Sulfuric acid doesn't seem quite right. What's going on to me?
Breeders, guys, there are some discus guys, and they use that stuff, the muriatic acid. I've used it before years ago. I don't like it. It's not it like the pH will change every day. You go back and test it, the pH will change. This, it stays the same every day.
Cool.
It's pretty. I'm not saying a month from now it'll be the same, but if you're setting up a pair of cardinals to lay eggs in a few days' time, this is fine.
Cool.
Have you? A lot of people that I've spoke to use botanicals like pods and leaves to reduce the pH.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not a permanent thing because it only reduces it, and then as that fades, it'll slowly climb back up. But is that something that is effective short term?
100% the best way to do it. That's the best way to do it, folks. I'm not going to lie. That is the best way to do it. But there are problems with that. Like the reason I use the phosphoric acid, it keeps things clean. You know, it's not that it's going to be a sterile environment. That's never going to happen. But when you're feeding little tiny fry and you're trying to tend from, if you see the fry, I mean, I'm 53. I can't see these things. I have to ask my son, hey, I got magnifying glasses. You know, if I see 2 or 3 of them, I know I got a couple hundred. You know, if I see 10, I've got hundreds of them. You know, they're so tiny. So you want to be careful having that stuff because it makes it more difficult now when you're raising the fry to keep things clean. Cleanliness and hygiene are very, very important. So I found that the peat moss is good because you can contain it in bags. So that's pretty good stuff. And the phosphoric acid, obviously just the water is crystal clear the whole time, and you can go in there and get stuff out. So cleanliness and hygiene is going to be very important because those little tiny fry are very touchy the first couple of weeks there.
We've had a question from the floor. Can you see that on your screen?
Oh yes, I sure can.
Right, cool. So yeah, with tetra species, the smaller variety like Ember, Reed, and Neons, is it correct they like to be in a smaller, somewhat nano tank, or is it the opposite? They prefer a large tank.
Those are good questions. So those 2 in particular, I happen to know about them. I don't know about all of them. There's so many tetra species out there, so I couldn't answer all of them. But those 2 in particular, so the Ember tetras, they are probably pretty good. And forgive me, because here in America, we use the only country that uses the gallon size, right? So probably a 20-gallon tank for those fish is pretty good. Now to breed those fish, you breed them very differently, okay? The neon tetras, you breed them as a pair. You breed them as a pair, and you want to breed them in a 5-gallon or a 2-gallon tank. The Ember tetras, you want to breed them in a 20-gallon tank. And let me grab something. For both of those fish, you got to have something like this because they're going to eat their eggs. Neon tetras especially are going to eat them as soon as they drop the eggs. So you have to have something to protect the eggs. So they're going to eat them immediately. Now, the Ember tetras is a cool fish because those guys, you can put them in a 20-gallon tank. And let me show you a tank here real quick. So if you were to put a bunch of Ember tetras in something that looked like this, kind of, I don't know if you can see that, guys.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a pretty tank, but there's a lot. You have to have a lot of floating plants on the top and then put a lot of Java moss. And they actually will not eat their eggs. So you could just put a colony of Ember tetras by themselves in a 20-gallon tank. And this is probably one of the easier fish you could reproduce at home. You put a bunch of Ember tetras in a 20-gallon tank with a bunch of floating plants, as you saw. And there's different kinds. Doesn't matter which kind. And then Java moss, lots of it. And they won't eat their eggs and their fry. And you'll get a colony pretty fast.
Cool.
But the key is you got to feed them live food, though, every day, like live brine shrimp and newly hatched stuff.
Cool. Is there any specific water parameters that the Embers tetra needs, or
the Embers are pretty easy. Now, here's the thing: there's tank raised Embers. And there's tank raised neon tetras too. So here in Florida, the fish farmers in Florida have been breeding the neon tetras for years now. And you could actually breed neon tetras in a pH of Florida water, 7.6, and TDS of over 200, which I bred neon tetras when I was 15, and the pH was 5.5 and the hardness was 0, and they wouldn't do it at any other way. And the neons are particular about temperature too. The wild ones, they have to spawn in cool water. The neons that are Florida tank raised will spawn in 80-degree Fahrenheit water and above even. So evolution of fish is something that I'm fascinated by now, because I started this hobby so long ago that I remember when these fish were so touchy, and to see them now just blows me away.
So for the New Zealand watchers and listeners, gallons to liters is roughly 4 times. So 20 gallon would roughly be 80 liters, give or take. I couldn't tell you what the conversion on the Faramajingle to Celsius is off the top of my head. I'm sorry, but yeah, just the gallons to liters is roughly 4 times.
Yeah, I actually had a conversion here.
Nice.
For me. So the Ember tetras, they'll spawn anywhere from about 78 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 25 degrees Celsius.
Cool.
To about 81, which is about 27 degrees Celsius. And they can go a little bit more or less than that, but that's the perfect range there. Now, I don't know if you folks have access to tank raised neon tetras.
I believe most of them are, yeah.
Most of them are. Then you shouldn't have a problem with those. They're so widely tank bred now. I'm amazed. Like the ones in Florida, pH of 7.6. I was blown away.
Cool. So, how many different species of tetras have you successfully hatched and raised in your time?
Oh my goodness, so many. I can't even count it, but it's probably over 30 or 20 or 30 at least. Back when I was 14 years old, I lived in Florida here, so I had access to go down to in Miami. There's a lot of wholesalers who import from Brazil and Peru. So I made friends very fast with some folks down there, and I had access to go down there and pick a lot of fish. So I was able to get a lot of pencil fish and cardinals and the splashing tetras.
Cool.
There's so many different kinds. So
cool.
It's fun.
So I guess there's a little bit of a double-edged sword for me in a positive way. One of the reasons I was really, really excited about getting you on is I wanted people who have considered tetras to be like impossible or really hard to breed to have the opportunity to talk to someone who has done that, and to open up the world of actually these are possible. They're not like they would be. This is a 100% possible achievement. The other thing is I'm getting into breeding tetras myself for my own shop. So, like, I'm trying to pick your brain as much as I possibly can.
Yeah, of course.
Conversation flows really well.
Well, I love that. I feel like the point and the goal here is that everybody can spawn in themselves.
Yeah.
So that we're not going to Brazil and Peru and stripping them, and these fish take a horrible, travel from where they get them. And a lot of these fish won't eat flake food or anything like that. So they're starving the entire time they're traveling. So I'm happy to give as much information as I can.
Cool. I'm aware that you've bred rummy nose and cardinals successfully. Do you want to, or can you please go through your process from start to finish with them? Maybe start with one of them. Your whole, go through your prep, your conditioning, and all the way through.
They're both very similar because they both come from very similar waters, but at the same time they're different too. So basically, the first thing is you want to get healthy fish. That's the hardest part. And for me, I had to start with wild fish, so I lost, unfortunately, a few fish in the beginning, and that's the heartbreaking part that I hate. Really, as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to lose a single fish in my fish. When one fish dies in here and I'm upset, I really like to tighten things up so I know what's happening. So I do have a protocol. So I hit them as soon as they come in. They come in with so many, especially The biggest thing with them is two things. There's the external parasites, because they're, in these wholesaler to wholesaler, they're exposed to so much stuff and they're stressed out. So those two things are combining for bad stuff. So I'm going to hit them for the external stuff first. And it's malachite green and formaldehyde. It's a mixture of those two, and that's common. I'm sure you can get that stuff. But I don't hit them with that unless I have to, because those chemicals are harsh. So I much prefer to watch them for a few days, and I give them lots of water changes. And that's the key to breeding these fish, is they need water changes, and a lot of water changes. So the cardinals, when I first got them, the wild group they were getting daily water changes. That's a little, that's a lot. You don't maybe have to do every day, but I would say twice a week if you want to induce them. You want to let them know, hey, the rain is coming, the environment is clean. Yeah, if you look at papers down there, the water is a TDS of like 0. It's so clean with all the rain. It's a rainforest. So you have all this rain there. So that one of the foundational keys is these fish, and you'll see them if you keep a lot of them, how they respond to getting a water change. Immediately they'll respond. They're schooling tightly. They're happy. To me, they're saying, hey, thank you. I'm happy now. You cleaned my tank here. So that is really key. So the water changes is key. Keeping them as much space as possible. Plants are very important, because as you know, plants are going to remove the nutrients from the water. So that's very important. So look at all my tanks. Floating plants, very important, because they remove nitrates. So that's very important. So getting that initial stock is going to be your key. That's the first step. Quarantining them off, making sure you have good stock. You want to get them young if you can. You don't want old fish. You want to get young fish. If you can get them from somebody who bred them, you're getting them from them, that's the best way, of course. But a lot of times you have to get wild fish. So quarantine, water changes, that's important. Know the species that you have. Don't go on the internet, unfortunately. I've been doing this for so long, and I look on the internet and the information is so bad. It's so erroneous. I'm sorry. I have books that were written years ago. I go to find books that were written in Germany that have the English translations, if possible, because, no offense to my countrymen here in the United States, we just don't take the hobby as seriously as they do over there. And I find them way superior, way superior. The average hobbyist that I meet here, again, no offense to all my countrymen, they're just not at the level, and I care about the fish. If I'm going to get a fish, there's many fish, I won't get them unless I know, like hatchet fish. I got some hatchet fish, and before I got them, I made sure I had fruit flies. I made sure I had a tank that was long enough for them to swim back. This is the stuff that I think about. So preparation is important. Get good reference material to know the waters that they come from. Understand that. Very important, because that's going to mean the difference between success. So researching, what pH do they need to have? What hardness? What temperature? That's important too. Even though it's South America, there's some rivers where the water is the 60s and 70s, low 70s. So you need to research as much as possible. And then the other thing I like to do is I'm going to put the young stock in a community type of tank, a planted tank. Floating plants are very important. A lot of people overlook this. We, especially in the United States, you see people keeping these tanks, all these big mice and everything, and these fish are terrified. They're horrible. Everything's going to eat me. So I look at things from the perspective of the fish. And I've collected fish in the wild too, so I see how they live, and they're trying to survive. It's a very violent world where everything's going to eat you if you cross the line just a little bit. So these fish, or a lot of them, the small fish that we keep, you're going to see them in vegetation. So floating plants are very important because the fish have a sense of security. So I always like to keep my little tetras with tanks with a lot of floating plants on top. So matching the water parameters, giving the fish security, those are the foundational things that you have to have. Water changes, like I said, very important. Most of our fish coming from South America come from rain forests where it's raining constantly. So the nitrates are zero constantly all the time. So if we want to succeed with these fish, we have to do the best we can to match that. The next step now is feeding them. Now that we got the good water conditions, now that we got a good healthy group, they feel safe, they feel secure. Feeding them, very important. I love live foods. I am a live food guy. I feed Daphnia, Moena. We feed what's called amphipods. They're small shrimp. And I culture them outside by the thousands. They're really prolific. Yeah, scuds, exactly, scuds. And I hatch brine shrimp every day, twice a day, in fact. So giving them live foods is very important. Now, what I've learned with the cardinals versus the rummy nose, the rummy nose are true insectivores, and they're little, what do we call it? They eat little pieces of plankton, but they're carnivores. The cardinals, on the other hand, if you feed them, when you want them to lay eggs, yes, give them a lot of mosquito larvae, bloodworms, as much protein as you can. The cardinals are a little different, though. They need some vegetables in their diet or they will succumb, as I've had happen a few times. They eat too much protein, they get sick, they get bloated, and they die. So I have learned the hard way with the cardinals to make sure I give them some vegetables every day. But
so when you say vegetables, I'm assuming that's coming from a pellet or something like that, or you actually feeding proper vegetables?
I actually found they will go after, because I have the the zucchini and stuff like that. You throw in there, and the algae wafers, they'll actually go after that. But the most convenient and successful way is to give them a flake food. Yes, a vegetable flake food. They'll take it right away. But they need it, is what I found. They really do. The rummy nose can eat protein every day, all day long, and they're fine. Cardinals will get too big and they get sick. So conditioning, very, very important. So once you see them get fat, and sexing them is something people always ask me, how do you sex them? Very easy. I'm going to tell you how to sex them right now, and it's super easy. So you want to sex them looking at them from the top. Okay. The males are slender, just like this. The females are, you'll see a little knot like this right in the center of them. You can look right there and it's obvious. So that's how you sex them. You want to look at them from the top. And that works for pretty much all of them. Cardinals, neons, rummy nose, all of them.
Right.
The other way is you look at the stomach too, and the male is like, it's straight line, and the female is curved, but when you give them food all day, that's not reliable. There's times you give them food and they all look like females. The only way you can truly tell is if you look at them from the top. And okay, so I have to continue, because once you get them fattened up, then I'm going to separate the sexes. This is very important too. Now, by this point in the community tank, you should start to see them. And this is why the floating plants are important. Most people never see this happen because they have these big giant lights, the fish are scared to death, and nothing's happening. But now if you have these floating plants, they feel secure, predators aren't going to catch them from the top. Now you're going to see them during the day, and the cardinals and the rummy nose and most tetras in general, not all, are going to lay their eggs as the sun comes up. So right as the crack of the sun comes up, I used to come in here at 5 a.m. and you'd see the rummy nose and the cardinals going off as soon as the sun comes up, and they'll go on for 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours. So you should see that happening in the community tank first. Once you see that happening, now you want to separate the sexes. Very important you separate the sexes, because if not, they'll keep laying eggs every day. And when you put them to lay eggs, they'll only lay 20 or 30 eggs. It's better to get 100 or 200 at one time, because it's the same. It's going to be just as much work to raise 20 of them than raising 200 of them. So you might as well raise a couple hundred.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So that's important to separate the sexes. Once the sexes are separated, now you want to go ahead and prepare the breeding tank. I actually have one set up down here. And these are cardinals that just laid eggs a few days ago. And those fry have actually hatched. And the reason I wanted to just see the tank is because I paint the tanks. Very important. Again, most people don't think about these things, when they keep fish, they're just thinking about themselves and they're not looking at it from the fish's perspective. If you have a tank where the fish is, you can see from all sides, well, that's terrifying. They're going to get a big fish can come out of nowhere and just eat them. So that fish is never going to feel secure. So it's very important you paint. I paint all sides of my tanks except for the front of the tank. And of course, you can adjust things however but having planted tanks, having places for the fish to hide is very important, especially for these small fish that we keep. So when you do the right thing, keeping the floating plants, you'll see them laying eggs in your tank all the time. And that's the time to separate them out. So now that you separate them out, males and females, now it's where you got to do some research too. Some of them, you want to breed them as pairs, but the ones like cardinals and rummy nose, you want to put a group of them in there. A group in there because if not, the fertilization rate will not be as high. And you always want to go more males than females. 2 to 1 if you can. I'll go 3 or 4 to 1 if I can. Because the fertilization rate really goes up higher. It really does. If not, it's just I've had just tons of eggs and the fertilization rate was really bad, and I didn't have enough males in there was the problem, because they get into a frenzy. And if you go on my YouTube channel, you'll see it. They'll just go into a frenzy and the females just start dropping eggs. You'll see 2 females going. There's 3 males on this one. There's not, for some reason, there's no males on her, but she's just dropping eggs.
Yeah.
So it just becomes a frenzy. So it's important to have a lot of males there. So preparing the breeding tank is important now. So it's now the rummy nose, very important that you keep, especially if you have wild ones. The rummy nose are harder to breed than probably any of them, the wild ones. And the reason is the cardinals, you can keep them at a pH of 6.5, and then when you're ready to breed them, drop it to 4.5. Everything works fine, no problem. The rummy nose, you must keep them in the pH of 4.5. So the eggs developing internally, and I learned this from the folks in the Czech Republic because they told me and I found that to be true 100%. So some of those fish, you want to make sure that you're raising them like some of those rarer, more touchy fish. That's going to be more important. The rummy nose wild ones are like that. You must raise them in the pH of 4.5 or 5.5 in order for the eggs to develop to hatch. If you do not, they won't develop. Right. So that's why the rummy nose have always been so difficult. So
that makes sense.
The water is important. So there's different ways. I personally like the botanicals. That's the best way. If you want to get a little bag of botanicals, the Canadian sphagnum peat moss, again, not sustainable, but that's the only peat moss that works. The stuff they sell in the United States, the pH is not low enough. The Canadian sphagnum peat moss, the pH is like 4. So that'll drop your pH, but you have to use the right stuff. But the botanicals is the best thing. Of course, you put that into a hang-on back filter. You can put it into a little air-powered box filter, and you prepare the breeding tank. What I do is I don't use chemicals. I've seen people say that you use all these chemicals. I just use salt. I just clean the tank with salt, a very strong salt solution, and then I rinse it, and then I'll put the water in the tank, and then I'll put my botanicals. And it usually takes about 2 weeks. You have to test it depending on the water you have and everything. It's going to be different for everybody, so you have to test it every day. But the shortcut is to use the food grade phosphoric acid. That's the shortcut. You'll have instant water instantly. For my water here, I use reverse osmosis water. In 20 gallons of water, I'll add between 3 to 4 milliliters of 10% food grade phosphoric acid, and that'll drop my pH from about 6.5 to 4.5.
Wow.
Actually, it goes down to about 4.1, but then it'll come up a little bit. So it just about 4.4. And the pH is really important. Well, let me caveat that. The carbonate hardness is the first thing. If you don't start with water that's 0 hardness and 0 carbonate hardness, you can forget about the other stuff. Don't even worry about it. The pH, you're not going to have, the eggs won't even hatch. You can drop the pH, but cardinal tetras, rummy nose, fish like that, if the carbon hardness and the general hardness isn't 0, those eggs won't even hatch. So that's the critical point there. So you have to, now with wild fish, this is wild fish. Now different fish come from different waters. We're talking about cardinals and rummy nose. Ember tetras, the water isn't that soft. It's got a little bit more minerals, a little bit, not much more, but there's different fish. So make sure that you research the fish that we're talking about. But these 2 fish we're talking here are extremes. I mean, they come from, from rivers that are getting rain, a gazillion gallons of rain a day. This water is near distilled water. And then on top of that, there's all those botanicals that are doing a further job of removing things. So we're looking at very pure water here. So these fish that we're talking about here, in these 2 instances, we want to make sure that our carbonate hardness and our hardness is 0. Now we can lower the pH. Now the pH can come down to 4.5 quite easy with either botanicals or the food grade phosphoric acid. I like to put the pairs, now that you've got the water right, you've separated the sexes, I'm going to go ahead and put the pairs, or I'm sorry, the groups in at night. Usually that gives them some time. Fish that have bred before, they'll spawn the next day. Boom, they know what to do. They're like, let's go. And the fact that you've kept them away from each other, and you're fattening them up, and as soon as they see each other, they're like, okay, this is time, let's go. And the water changes there, everything. It's giving them the signals it's time to lay eggs. So that's why those water changes. But see, most people talk about the water changes now. I said the water changes way before that. When you start conditioning them is when you start the water changing, because biologically their bodies start to change. Okay, it's time to lay eggs. It's time to reproduce. We have a very short window. This has to happen now. So you start those water changes then. So then when you put the fish to breed that night, they'll probably go the next day, but some fish will take 2 or 3 days. I don't like to go more than 3 days. Do not feed them when they're in the breeding tank, because we want to keep things as clean as possible. As clean as possible. Very important. So you put them in, everything goes well. They lay eggs. All right, this is great. With cardinals and rummy nose, they're going to hatch in, well, first of all, the temperature should be anywhere between 78 and 82. Here in Florida, they were laying eggs in 86 too. I mean, so it's flexible. At that temperatures, they're going to the fry hatch very quickly. So in 16 to 18 hours, they hatch. Amazing. I mean, it's just amazing how these fish survive. Then cardinals on the 3rd day, they'll absorb their yolk sac and fourth day. Got it backwards. For the cardinals on the 4th day, they're going to absorb their yolk sac and they're ready to eat. The rummy nose grow way faster. They are amazing. We'll talk about them here in a second. On the 3rd day, they're ready to eat. They've absorbed their yolk sacs and they're ready to go. And the rummy nose grow at just lightning speed. They're amazing. Both of them. Now, this is where it gets interesting. I've always read and personally seen that you feed them paramecium right away. They're so tiny. But I've heard from the breeders in Europe, they feed them brine shrimp right away. We'll have to talk about that another time on the Tetra group that we've all talked with. That's where I learned that from some of these guys. There's a process, so we'll talk again. That's a whole process I don't even understand, so I don't want to get into that. But the fact that information is out there is really cool. But the way that I raise them now, and this makes your life so much easier, guys. Paramecium is probably the best way to raise them, but this is a culture of hyper-dense vinegar eels. And vinegar eels, I'm sure you've heard of them, but this culture here is raised the way you would raise. This is basically oatmeal mixed with apple cider vinegar, and the vinegar eels are able to reproduce here. And look how prolific they are. I mean, they're billions there. I mean, you can just see how thick they are there. Billions. So what makes this so effective to raise the fry of tetras is they free swim throughout the tank. And paramecium are still the food of choice, but you can't. You got to have a lot of paramecium cultures to feed a spawn of tetras, man. You know, so that's the problem that I've seen in the past is you'll just run out of paramecium, and they're not prolific, and your wife will kill you because they stink. You know, so this is clean. This doesn't smell at all, and this will last maybe 6 weeks time, and there's no smell. And again, you take your finger or a little brush, and my God, I mean, this will feed thousands of fish, thousands of fish. So I feed the vinegar eels for about a week, and it blows me away because I got into it not into it, but we were having an intellectual discussion. I'm like, there's no way. I've been doing this for 40, since for 30 something, 40, almost 40 years. Yeah, there's no way. But yeah, he showed me. So they what they do is they have some sieves, and these are professionals up there, and they're able to get the eggs. The brine shrimp, they're hatching them. They're at 80-degree temperature, which I think is like 28 degrees Celsius. It's very warm. The eggs hatch faster. And then they use sieves to get the right micron size to separate them out, to then feed those newly born rummy nose and cardinals. But again, these are professionals, and they're doing this at a professional level. So I don't think I have the time and equipment to do that, But with the vinegar eels, that makes it easy for anyone. And then, of course, once you get them on newly hatched brine shrimp, then they grow super fast. Really fast. Raising the fry, though, I'm going to talk about real quick. That's the key to this here. So you want to, if you're starting small, say you have like the cardinals or rummy nose, you could breed them in 20 gallons of water, which I think that was like 375 liters or something like that.
20 gallons?
Yes.
About 80 liters.
80 liters. Okay, so that works out pretty good because you'll get about 100 you'll get 100 or 200 frying in there. That's manageable. You could have a sponge filter in there. The key is feeding. You got to feed enough that they eat enough, but you don't want to overfeed too. So water changes are important. As soon as they lay eggs, I'm going to lower the tank level in half, because when the fry hatch, they don't need all that. It's going to stress them out. They have to swim so far. So you want it shallow. So that's why the 20 long is good. It's a long, shallow tank.
Yeah.
So you want to. So as soon as the eggs hatch, you want to do a water change. Bring the water level down about halfway so it's shallow. On the third or fourth day, depending on which species we're talking about, you want to start them on their first food. That's very important. Where people mostly fail at this here, I mean, you could get your water right. That'll take some time, but as soon as you figure it out, you can get that right. But raising the fry, that is going to take practice and patience, and you got to be meticulous here, because if you overfeed, it's problematic to get in there. You got to get in there. If you see a lot of food overfed and stuff like that, that could be a problem. When you start getting them on brine shrimp, this is a common problem too. Even when you separate the eggs, you're still getting a lot of eggshells into there. So there's a product, it's very inexpensive. It's called the brine shrimp egg separator. Here in the United States, you can get them on Amazon for about $9.99. But I have noticed such a difference when you're raising the fry, especially small fry like that. Cleanliness, hygiene is going to be critical. Critical. So you want to use, if you have Moina, you have an advantage. So if you don't have to use brine shrimp, because brine shrimp will only last for a certain amount of time, so you have to be very careful you don't overfeed it. But if you have stuff like Moina, now you can put, it doesn't matter how much you put in there. It's they'll survive and live for days, if not infinitely, in the tank. So raising the fry is the critical part here. I do water changes, depending on how many fry in there. I would say at least every couple days, but every day if you can. But cleanliness is going to be your, hygiene is going to make the difference between success and failure. The professionals, what they do is they make these flow-through fry boxes where there's a drip of water going into each one, that there's a foam overflow so they don't get sucked in. That is the very best way to raise the fry, if you could do it like that. And that's what the professionals in Indonesia and the Czech Republic, that's what they do. But us folks at home, who's got time to build all that and go through our truck, right? So we have to don't overfeed, is what I'm trying to say. Don't overfeed. And if you do, you better go in with a little tiny pipette, sucking up all that stuff, getting it out of there and doing a water change, because the fry will die very quickly. If you don't keep things very clean, they die fast, super fast.
That's probably one of the. I'm saying that's probably one of the number one causes for people failing when it comes to breeding tetras is the fry.
Fry mortality, yes. So little tricks of the trade. I was just going to share that is you want to put some snails in there. Snails are really important. They're going to eat a lot of the uneaten food. I love snails. They are your best friend. Pygmy quarries are my best friend. As soon as I put the little fry on, you can't put them in too early or the pygmy quarries will eat them, even though there's, but once the little tetras are eating brine shrimp, usually about, to be safe, I would wait till they're about 10 days to 14 days old. You could put some pygmies in there, and that's going to help keep that tank, because they love brine shrimp. So they'll just go in there and eat all the brine shrimp up. But hygiene is important. Water changes is important.
Are you water changing with your treated RODI type water, or are you a bit more lenient and more of a tap water sort of thing? You know where I'm going with that?
Yeah. I don't mess with water too much. I just use straight RO water. So my RO water comes out about a TDS of about 7 or 8. And then my pH is about 6.5, and I don't touch it. I just use that, and that's it.
Yeah.
The only time I mess with the pH and the parameters is when I want to have them lay eggs. So now the rummy nose, like I shared with you, those you got to start them out for if you have wild ones. Now I found with the F4s I have now, you don't have to do that now. They're fine now. But the wild ones, you do. So yeah, the rummy nose are probably the tougher of those.
What was it that attracted you to the rummy nose for breeding? Was it the fact that they were a challenge, or is it a love for the fish itself?
Man, love for the fish itself. I never bred rummy nose before. I bred cardinals back when I was like 16 years old. I bred all these fish. Never got around to the rummy nose, so I researched a lot about it. And just fascinated about how they spawn. So on that point, in my research on the rummy nose lay eggs on the surface. So really cool. So where they're found, there's all these floating plants. Also enough, there's these leaves that fall down. on the surface, and they lay eggs in the surface. So the breeders in Indonesia, they use those big catalpa waves,
Yeah.
and they hang them on a bamboo stick, and that's how they get them to lay eggs. So that was kind of interesting. Yeah,
Cool.
but I found that they'll just use a mop. And by the way, I'll show you what a mop looks like. Whoa, almost fell down. This is called eyelash yarn. I don't know if you can see that.
We've seen that recently, didn't we, Cam?
You've seen that before. That stuff works great. They love that stuff. They love it.
There's a lot of conversation about like light sensitivity with eggs. Have you found this to be the case, or are they not too bad?
I believed that up until recently. I did. I used to think, use a red light and all this stuff. And I actually watched a guy on YouTube from Indonesia, and I was able to translate what he was saying. And he was just had a flashlight, and he was doing this and that, and he had runny nose and cardinals. It's nonsense. This stuff about, and I said, well, let me test this out. And sure enough, I've done it all. And I've been, I'm 53 again, been doing this for how long? Long time. So I was 8 years old. And I always thought that to be true. And no, it is. I don't think it's true. I put lights. I've not seen any difference at all. So, and I would have staunchly opposed that if I had heard it before. So,
the other thing that you mentioned before is the age of the fish. What's the kind of optimum age? Are we talking 3-month-old? We're talking a year old? What sort of age?
Great question. That's a great question. I'm going to show you right now. These cardinals right here were born on September 6th. And that 3-month-old cardinal, look at the size of them right there. They're big. They are already laying eggs.
Wow.
They're already laying eggs. So I would say if you can, you want, usually the wild fish are pretty young. They're usually about 4 months old. So you want to get fish that are probably less than a year old, optimally 6 months old or less. So if you're getting wild fish and you see those small ones, get the small ones. They're a better investment. You got a better chance of them surviving. Number one, they're more adaptable, and you want to get them young so they will adapt to your conditions and all that stuff. So for the fish. Everybody wants to get to the big ones. Those are older fish. You don't want them.
Cool. So see, once they start spawning, how regular will they spawn?
Ooh, every day. Oh my goodness. Cardinals and runny nose, once you get them going, the water, and the triggers are important. So those water changes every day is what gets them to go. That's triggering in their brains. Hey, rainy season's here. It's raining every day. And as long as you're doing those, you have to do them every day. I mean, the thing is this, right? It's the nitrates, right? It's the nitrates. So if you have a lot of fish, then you might have to do them every day. If you have, a bunch of fish in a tank, but if you don't have that many fish, you got floating plants and planted tanks, maybe it's once a week, maybe it's twice a week. I don't know. You have to make that determination based on how many fish, and also make this hobby fun for yourself, right? Don't try and kill yourself doing this. It doesn't make any sense, right? Have fun, enjoy yourself. But when you have a lot of fish in a small, space, especially when you're raising fry, they just need a lot of water changes. That is key. So they'll just be laying, and especially when you have them when you're conditioning them, you're giving them so much food. So it's important to give them a lot of water changes too.
So I'm just going to throw this out there to the chat. If there's any particular species that you want to ask David on, care, spawning, whatnot, please chuck them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to be really selfish and I'm going to talk about ask the questions about the fish that I'm trying to pay attention to at the moment. So if there's specific ones you guys are looking for, please feel free to chuck them in the chat and we'll see how we can go there. Cool. So being that I'd like to be a little bit selfish, green fire tetras, breath buns. Have you had any time with them and been successful with them?
I bred those years ago. They're gorgeous. I love them so much. And I'm gonna have to go back to my memories here. I'm talking, this was the 80s. This was the
wow.
mid 80s, probably 85, 84. I had access to a wholesaler down in Davie, Florida. And he was a German guy. Great story. I'd sit there and talk to him for hours. He had discus and all these rare fish. Green fire tetras, one of the ones I got from him. And when I bred them, what I remember about them the most is that they breed. You need fluffy, like kabamba.
Mm-hmm.
They like to lay their eggs in very fluffy plants like that. And I used water Sprite. If you notice, I use water Sprite in all my tanks. So I had a floating layer of water Sprite, and back then I used peat moss. I didn't have all the YouTube and advice to learn from other people. So, and here's something that works: just peat moss. I used peat moss, and they'll lay the eggs in the peat moss, and they won't find them. The eggs will go. So that was the egg screen I used back when I was 15, 16 years old. I believe their pH was not. And I'm not even, remember, I'm going from memory here, so forgive me if I don't remember exactly. They were not terribly difficult to spawn. Their pH was, I think, low sixes, like 6.2. It didn't have to be like the cardinal where you have to bring it down to 5.5 or something like that. But the key was they were getting mosquito larvae. I was giving them at the time. I lived in Puerto Rico, which is a tropical island, and I had this little like pool. There was a concrete vat, and I was able to go up there and collect mosquito larvae every day. So giving them mosquito larvae every day, after a while, they started just going at it and laying eggs. What I do remember is that you want to breed them not as a pair, but in a group of fish.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that, most fish lay eggs when the crack of dawn. They were more middle of the day.
Yeah.
That's
what I've read. Midday, early afternoon is when they decide is their trigger time.
Is your trigger time?
So do you think that's a temperature related then? If it's midday, do you think the heat triggers it as opposed to the cooler waters coming in?
Tetras, wild tetras, man, they're so tuned in with the environment. So to your point, all that's going to be important. The time of the day, the temperature, the amount of light in the tank. Like cardinals, wild cardinals, they'll never lay eggs if you have to darken the tank. I forgot to tell you about that too, guys. When you're breeding the cardinals and the rubbing of most tetras in general, you really need to shade the tank. You don't want this in a if you see my breeding tank down there, look how dark.
Yeah.
Very dark down there. So that's very important. They won't lay their eggs with all this light there. So now some of them are not like that. Green fires, neon tetras don't need it to be. No, I'm sorry, not neon tetras. Green fires. There was another one that I can't remember the one I was thinking about. Black phantom tetras. They'll lay their eggs in the middle of the day too. They don't want it dark. They want a little bit of light. But again, when I say a little bit light, I'm talking indirect light. Not light on top of it. When they always want to lay their eggs at least in indirect light maximum. So that's an important factor to consider too. The green fire tetras not so important, not so sensitive, I should say. But the cardinals, the rummy nose, the neon tetras, they almost want it black, dark, really dark.
Cool. We've had a question regarding green neons. If John wants to bring that up from Helen.
Yes. Where is that? Sorry.
I can see it right here.
Cool. Good.
Are green neons any different to breed than cardinals or standard neons?
Very similar. I have never bred the green neons before, but I've talked to many people who have. Never bred them before. One of my favorite fish too. I love them. They're so similar to a cardinal, but just a little bit more slender, a sleeker look. I love them. Never bred them before. My understanding is the temperature and the pH and the water conditions very similar, almost exact. But temperature is different for the green neons. They need a cooler temperature. So they're going to need it about 25 degrees, I think 23 to 25 degrees Celsius, versus cardinals and rummy nose are going to be at 28. degrees Celsius. So those are a little bit, but everything else the same. The environment they come from, I've read a lot about them. I just haven't bred them yet. Haven't gotten to them yet. But one of my favorite fish too. Those are cool. Those are cool. I will tell you this: I never bred them, and I had them when I was a kid, so they're more difficult. I'm going to say because I never got to breeding them when I was a kid.
Cool. And Red Laser has asked, what about the Red Laser Tetra? I don't believe this is a Tetra that we have in New Zealand. So have you played with them, dealt with them?
Never played with those, but those are their hemiparamus. I've bred many of those before, the species before. They're all going to breed the same. And they're not, again, research them in particular, but they're mostly going to breed the same. They're going to egg scatter. Those get big. You're going to need more than a 20-gallon tank. Most of the hemiparamus I've had in the past, you want about a 55-gallon tank, if that makes sense. So large, they need this space. Yeah. They need the space, and you need a big, large group of them too. Actually, it might not be a 55. You might be able to do a 40. A 40 might be long. But what's important with them is they need to have the ability to swim back and forth. You know, if they're too tight, they're not happy. They need that back and forth to do the courtship, to have the proper courtship, if that makes sense. Some tetras, you need like the hatchet fish. I've bred the hatchet fish before, and the big thing with them is they need a very long tank because the males are going to do this dance, and they need a 4-foot tank minimum to do that dance. So the hemiparamus are very similar to that. Is most of the ones I spawn like that, they just need a lot of room.
And we've got another question from the audience. Rochelle would like to know what tetras are the most aggressive in personality.
Nanostomus morinthali, one of the coral red pencilfish. I am surprised. I had a group of those back in March. The males were aggressive. They are really aggressive. Most of the tetras I've kept are not very aggressive. I've kept most. That's just how the kind of fish person I am. I like to keep fish. I don't have to separate and worry about beating her up. I don't really like that. I haven't kept many of those. I've bred Congo tetras before. Most of the fish I should tell you about. Very easy to breed Congo tetras. They'll breed in straight reverse osmosis water. pH of 6.5. They will eat their eggs. So you got to be careful with them eating their eggs, but they'll breed in just straight reverse osmosis water. So very easy. Their eggs take a week to hatch. So that's the big problem with them is you'll be sitting there for a week going, oh my God, most tetra eggs hatch in 16 or 18 hours. But the reason I mentioned those are big fish, but even those big ones aren't, they're not aggressive. The most aggressive ones I found are some of those little coral red pencilfish. The males are a little for pound, they're a little bit nasty.
And we've had another question.
Yeah.
There you go.
There we go. Sorry if it's been discussed. I just got here, and what can you tell me about the banded darter tetras?
I've never bred any of those. Those are actually on my checklist to get those. The availability on those is not very high. I haven't seen them here in the States for a while. They used to be the importers back in the 80s where I used to go to. They were very common. And what I like about them is they hang at the lower third of the tank, which is really nice. And they have so much personality. But those fish I've never bred before. And I've only kept them, and it was years ago, so I don't know a whole lot about them. I'd really have to look on the internet to get you information. So I'm not going to tell you something I don't really know about. So they don't have a lot of personal, experience.
You've shown us spawning mops, and you have used floating plants, and you showed us what it looks like, a bit of a cradle type thing. I'm assuming that was PVC with mesh around it.
Mesh around it, yes.
Yeah. What other tools do you find basically incredibly valuable for your spawning procedures?
Reverse osmosis, that's the key. If your water isn't in tune for this fish you're trying to have, that's the most important tool. Just the pH meter, very important too. Anytime you're messing with chemicals and stuff like that, you want to make sure that you're able to monitor things. But at the same time, I don't want to mess with things. I don't test my water every day. I know it's stable. I know the pH comes out at 6.5, and I leave things alone. But the key tools for me are my reverse osmosis, because I change water like crazy, and I think that's really the most important thing I leave with everyone here. Hygiene is so important. Don't kill yourself. I keep saying water changes every day, but look at how many fish are in that tank there. That's why. I mean, that's the reason why. Most hobbyists at home, most folks are not going to have that many fish in the tank. So the point is, monitor your nitrates. Make sure that you keep things healthy. Most of our fish, really, that's the biggest thing I see. Don't overfeed your fish. If you're not trying to breed your fish, you could probably feed them once a day. Like those cardinals, if I wasn't trying to get them sized up and stuff, I'd only feed them once a day, because and they'll live longer. So hygiene is the most important thing. Having tools, like for me, I have a good siphon. So I can go in there quickly and drain the water out of tanks fast. And if you can automate that, my God, that makes it even easier, right? So to me, it's just making your life easier. Those are the most important things. Make the maintenance of keeping your fish as easy as possible. So if you know that you're a person that's not going to change the water a lot, you hate it, then plants are your best friend. Keep a lot of plants in your tank. Don't overstock your tanks. And that's the secret. If you just keep it hygiene, and the fish are happy, the fish are healthy, and that's the key. Keep it simple. I see so much technology, so many things have changed, but at the end of the day, a sponge filter and water changes and live plants, and that's all you need. That's it.
Let nature take its course.
Yes, sir. That's the key. Let nature take its course. Yep.
Yeah.
Speaking of nature, we've had another question from Rochelle. Does weather play a part in spawning with tetras like corridors? Can rain and different atmospheric pressures induce spawns?
That is a great question. From all the breeders and people I've talked to personally, myself too, I've never seen that. But the water changes. That's the trigger. So no, the atmospheric pressure, I don't think that's it. But certainly the chemical composition of the water, the water changes, the nitrates being low, all that fresh infusion of clean water every day, that's the trigger. But like quarries, I've got some quarries in here, so I'll show you. I got some C102s, if anybody knows about them. They hide like crazy. They are difficult to breed. I find them to be fascinating because, like, to the point of the question is, it was just asked there, there's a lot of things we don't understand. There's, environmental triggers. So with the tetras, I have not seen that. No. With the tetras, no. Quarries, yeah, I'm going to probably be needing some whole intervention to get them to breed, So we'll see what happens.
And we've got a controversial, polarizing question coming up.
There we go.
Oh no, that's a good question. Oh my god.
So, yeah, what are your thoughts on glow tetras, the GMO ones?
Yeah, man, I'm not a big fan of that stuff. My good friend Bill Shields worked for 5D Tropicals for years, and he actually bred them by the bazillions. 5D is the one who's got the patent and been breeding them and spreading them all over the world. So, here's my thoughts on it, and I don't like it personally. I don't want to keep those fish. It's not for me. But if it keeps fish from being picked out of South America, and if it takes the pressure off the wild fish, I know that's a weird answer, right? Because I'm with you. I'm all about conservation. I'm all about being responsible. I hate the fish industry to some degree, because I've seen the backside of it and all the fish that die, and People don't talk about that. It's disgusting. It makes my stomach turn. I don't want to see that. So because the glowfish are sustainable and bred in tanks, they're more resistant. They're evolved, to be abused, quite honestly. So in a weird sense, I almost have people keep those fish and then keep our rivers and all that, leave those poor fish alone. So, but I don't like those type of fish now.
Yeah, we're lucky we don't get any of them down here in New Zealand. They're just not here. They're not allowed to come in. I'm on the same field. I'm not a fan of them. But
yeah,
their own, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, is it the kind of fish that people that have kept tropical fish for years would take, or is it the kind of fish that is like a gateway fish from somebody that's never had an aquarium before, sees them and think they're cool, gets them and then realizes they're not so cool, and then moves on to more natural fish? So then they can see a purpose in that side of things, coinciding what David said, where it is preventing some fish being, pulled in from the wild, but it's the process that went into initially creating them that I don't like. It's like a Frankenfish.
Yeah,
it's a Frankenfish. Yeah. I don't like it because who knows what could happen and what that opens up and all that. And I'm not a big fan of that. I prefer tank bred fish. It's weird because if it takes the pressure off, going in South America and getting all these poor discus and angelfish and all these cardinals, and we know half of them or more are going to die, and I don't like that, So that's where I hope that as a hobby, I'd like to see what's going on in the Czech Republic and Germany, where breeders are breeding these fish. It's so there's no. And it's the same thing. I guess we're exploiting fish to some degree, either way. But I rather that the rivers and the natural environment be left alone, if possible.
Cool. And I believe that Zen has tried to redeem themselves. If you want to bring that up, John.
Have
you ever done anything with Project Piaba? Or any conservation industries? And what are your thoughts on which ones are good to support?
Yeah, Project Piaba, I'm going to be honest with you. They are, I just think they're good. There's science there. There is, like, to your point, sir, you made a good point early on, Project Piaba, it is sustainable. It is science. That's not, you can't argue. But the point that we're making is, even though it's sustainable, those fish are, in my opinion, still suffering because of the transportation aspect of it. And weeks, months of transport and the death there. So Project Piaba, at the end of the day, because I was professional in the industry, it's a lobbyist group, kind of, almost, sort of, that they're supported by funds from these big monster corporations like Seagrass Farms and 5D that are here in the United States, and they basically want to get good information science to back up what they're trying to do, and that's exploit getting fish out of South America. So at the end of the day, let's call it what it is. So there's science there. Yes, it is. You can't argue it, but let's see, what is their goal? What's their point? Who's paying their, where's the money coming from? And when you
follow the money.
Yeah, I mean, come on. At the end of the day, yes, there's science. There's these great scientists that have written these papers, and yes, it's sustainable. Correct, because they are annual fish. Epistogrammas, tetras, they're annual fish. They're going to die anyway. So yes, there's something to be said about that. But that's the natural course of things that's going to happen. That's food for the other animals there, versus them coming here and suffering this journey where they're dying in a bag, dying in some exporters, dying in some pets store. That's the side of the hobby that I don't like. I really don't like the side of the hobby. And at the end of the day, Project Piaba is a corporate funded entity. So that's what I have to say about that.
I totally on board with you with sustainability. Here in New Zealand, we're a little bit limited on what we can get. We are obviously at the arse end of the world, and everything has to be flowing in. Like, we don't really have a lot of options with that. As far as commercial breeders go, so from a wholesale point, I think we've got 3 importers and 1 commercial breeder.
Wow.
They only really deal with live bearers, African cichlids, bristle nose sort of thing. So like we're kind of damned if we do, damned if we don't. If we want to keep fish down here, we have to have them imported from the other side of the world. Like, we've got no real option here. So like I can totally understand and get what you're saying with that. Cool, it's sustainable, but there are so many issues in transportation from here to here. But we don't have any other options. Like it just is what it is for us down here.
It is what it is. Yeah, I understand that. And like to me, I'd like to see things evolve where, and this is where there's so much paperwork and bureaucracy, but in a perfect world, if I could wave a magic wand, right, there would be breeders, not necessarily professionals, but people who love the hobby. I know that's a pipe dream possibly, but that really want to maintain the species of fish. So then, people who want to keep them are getting them, like in the Czech Republic. There's all these breeders. I went to the Czech Republic and I met this guy in a basement, and he was breeding all these tetras in a room this big, and he was doing an ungodly number. I forget the exact number, but it was like 5 or 10,000 fish a month out of that room.
Wow.
Unbelievable. And he had a central system, and that's one of the keys to success here. So all the tanks were connected, so there was like thousands of gallons of water, even though they were in like 10 gallons, or really in this whole big giant system. So the synergy of that was very important. So I saw that and I go, wow, that's what I'd love to see here in the United States, everywhere where there's these breeders breeding fish or something like that. And it's not this taking them out of the rivers and all this stuff. And that would be, because obviously there's a commercial demand worldwide.
Correct.
So hopefully we can, our thinking can change, and we could, because the environments are so fragile these days. I was hearing a paper just recently where the temperatures have gone up so much now that in Brazil, all the Epistogramma agassiz, there's males, it's all males. So a scientist wrote this paper, alarming paper, global warming is having a massive impact, where, now we could go in and what's going to happen. So he's going to go back next year and see what happens. But the temperature rose like 5 degrees. It's significant in that particular area. And now there's like 90% males being produced because of the temperature change. So, man, there's so much to discuss here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that's not the only species. I think Otolampicus from Lake Tanganyika, another one, water temperature develops either females or males, whether it's up or down. I'm not can't remember what it is, but there'll be plenty of fish out there that'll develop particular ways depending on all sorts of things like that. And I totally understand what you're saying and where you're going with that.
Yeah. Fish are amazing, right? They really are.
Yeah.
Adaptable. So adaptable.
So before we get on today, you sent us a link to your YouTube channel, which is obviously quite new and quite fresh. I'll get John to put a link into the chat for everyone who wants to have a wee look later on. What can we kind of expect from that coming up in the future? Because clearly you are an absolute wealth of knowledge.
Thank you.
What can we kind of expect if we're going to jump on and subscribe to your knowledge, basically?
Next year, I want to do more knowledge-based stuff, just talking about the simple things that happen here every day. As I'm going on the internet, I'm seeing this great need for, information. I think that people go on the internet and these websites are watered down. And when you're researching, for example, chili raspberries, there's all these websites with information on them. And the information is so erroneous. It's like the pH is 7.5. No, they come from black water. They need pH of 5.5, and they come from cooler water on top of that. So all these, not cooler water, they come from warmer water on top of that. So there's just a lot of misinformation. So I want to talk about just little things here. Try to go back to when I started with fish, the information was very different. People read more. I think now people are going on YouTube and getting their information, and it's not always accurate. So I'd like to go back to a lot of the techniques that have been lost, like peat moss and botanicals. That's all we had back in the day. And remember, I still said I'm lazy, so I used phosphoric acid that's quicker, but the botanicals and the peat moss is the way to go. So, and then also the brand new pencil fish, the Cenepas, the Natus domus. I got a big. I want to get some more of those. I had some of those. And I didn't succeed in them. I only had like 3 fry, and they didn't survive. So I want to succeed with those next year too. So,
Cool.
But really, I want to continue to maintain the fish I have. I think, over the years I've been a collector of fish, and now I would rather just really improve and maintain the ones that I have.
Mm-hmm. I love that you're using the word success and not luck. I'm a firm believer that you're not lucky with fish. You're being successful. You've got to give them what they want, and then you'll be successful. It's not that I bought a bunch of fish, they died, 3 left, they were lucky. No, something's gone wrong somewhere for that to kind of happen.
Sir.
Other than, of course, old age and random things that happen. But you know where I'm going with. Success is such a better way of keeping fish than being lucky with them.
I agree with that. We could talk. We could have a whole show about that. I think too many hobbyists here in America. And I hate to pick on my countrymen here, but it's the truth. I get irritated by that. Oh, I lost 10. I'm like, man, I'm not okay with that. I lost some fish back in March because the water, they put some chemicals in the water. I wasn't aware of it. It overloaded my carbon system. There was this. I've since made adjustments so that never happens again. I mean, I was like, wow, that really, so I'd like to see people be, to your point, Cam, be more responsible. It's not lucky. That's research. There's a life you're taking in your hand like a dog or a cat. And there's a lot of fish I'd like to have, but I don't have them because I don't have the space. I don't have the right parameters for them, all those things. So I love that you said that.
Listen, before you answer the next question, Cam, I'm going to just have to. I need to go, sadly. Yep. But it's been really, really good talking to you, David.
Thank you, guys.
I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the show, and I'll catch up with you later on. And thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Right, so I'm just going to go. Right.
So, again, for my own selfishness, lemon tetras. What's your experience been with them? Because I have, I've just separated a couple of females and a male. I've just begun my prep to try and get a wee spawn out of them.
Those are real here in Florida. They're very, they're tank bred. So but I bred them years ago when they weren't tank bred. They were wild. They're one of the easier ones to spawn. So just a spawning mop, nice, they will eat the eggs, so make sure you have something to protect their eggs. Darken the tank on all sides, and they're pretty. It's been years. I mean, I'm talking years, but they're one of the easier ones to spawn. You shouldn't have too much problems with them. Live foods is the key. Most of the times, I know when they're going to lay eggs before I put them in the breeding tank. So if you've seen them, the males chasing them, if you've seen that kind of, them being active. As long as you give them the right parameters and a good water change, they'll usually spree right away.
Cool.
Lemon tetras shouldn't give you too much problems.
Cool. Well, that'll be. I will let you know via message in a few days' time if something's happened.
I want to see. I want to see, man. That's awesome. Yeah, it's exciting to see those little fry men. It's really neat.
Yeah. Cool. Rochelle's asked about glass blood fins. What sort of size tank do they need and size to shoal?
Glass blood fins is one I've never actually even kept before, believe it or not, and they're fairly common. So I've never kept those before. I don't even know where they come from, to be honest with you. So there's so many. Tetras is one of the biggest families of fish, as you know. They're just tremendously big.
And Braxton has brought up, just back towards when we're talking about the luck and being successful, he thinks that luck might have a little to do with it, considering where we get fish as consumers. Yeah. I think there can be an extent to that.
I'll be right back. Let me get something.
Yeah, I think you're right, Brexton, and thank you for joining us. I think you can be correct on that to a little extent. Equally, once you've got them home and giving them what they kind of want, looking after them and their care requirements, that kind of stops that luck. And that, good fish husbandry, getting them in, quarantining them, fattening them up, getting them on live food, getting them all content again, and then it sort of changes that point. I do understand where you're coming from. Like I said earlier in the conversation, our fish get flown in from halfway across the world, big bags of probably hundreds of fish, and if not, several hundreds of fish going on through the very stressful quarantine. So I totally understand where you're going from that. So yeah. Cool. And he's clarifying.
That's a great point right there too. Let me go back to that point, because that's a good point. Here in the United States, the pet shops, you can't fault them, but their intestinal worms are one of the most contagious worms out there in pet stores. And the live bearing worms are the worst ones. And the reason why I'm saying that is you really want to make sure you quarantine for at least 2 weeks. I use flubendazole, and there's a water-soluble type that they sell here. I'm sure they sell something over there too, but that's one of the biggest problems I found is, to your point, getting fish, being lucky. No, don't be lucky. To your point, Cam, prepare and know what you're doing. So when you get the fish, you want to hit them with flubendazole. There's a product here called Prazi Pro. It's available on Amazon, so you might be able to get it too. But that's a water-soluble one, and what's important about it, the life cycle of that intestinal worm is really, it's like 2 weeks you need to knock that out. So you want to continuously treat. I pretty much any fish I bring in my fish room, first of all, they're going to quarantine, but I'm going to hit them for 2 weeks, especially for those intestinal worms are so contagious. And I found a lot of people get out of the hobby, because of stuff like that. So that's a good point. Getting your fish. And unfortunately, no matter what pet shop you get, they're not going to treat them for 2 weeks. No wholesaler is. They're just not. So it's up to you to take that responsibility on, unfortunately.
And Braxton has just clarified a little bit. He means like chili race water come from soft black water, and if we buy them from pet stores, we're on the back foot. I totally get that. And to that, I don't disagree with you. You're 100% correct. And yeah, there's only so much. I'm obviously retailers. Only so much that we can do as retailers, and you're 100% right on that. So in saying that, retailers are able to set up brackish systems for brackish fish and saltwater for saltwater fish. So maybe botanically black water based fish with lower pH, softer water could also be an option to try and make that more successful in the long run.
That's a great point, and that's unfortunate. And the thing to do is get them as soon as they get them. Like if you get them from pet store, say, hey, when do you order your fish? When do the fish come? If you can get them before they even unbag them, like that's what I would do. I'd be waiting for them if you could, because it's like you said, you start off on the back foot, but if you get them healthy, amazingly, believe it or not, other than breeding though, I have seen, because the wholesalers down in Miami, I've seen even cardinals, in hard water and everything, if they're handled properly, that's not the worst thing. It's not the worst thing. It's really how they're handled. And if they're fed too is important, because a lot of times, a lot of those importers don't feed them, and it makes a difference. So you'll see them skinny, and that's when they don't have a chance. When they don't eat at all during that journey, that's when they have no chance.
Yeah, I agree. Like, again, as a retailer, I think it's my responsibility from when I get my fish from my wholesalers, before I pass them on, or even before I put them onto sale, is to make sure they're nice and plump, nice and healthy. We do an in-house quarantine for be a minimum 2 weeks, normally 3 weeks.
That's awesome. Wow.
And for the end consumer to try and avoid all of that issues that can potentially come with it. So, I see a lot of not the most healthiest fish come in, and skinny fish come in, and I can open a box and see straight away which ones are going to give me issues and which ones are going to be fine. So I totally feel that.
Well, that's amazing that you did do that. If you were here in the States, I'd buy all my fish from you. That's awesome.
Cool. Do you have any other social media besides your YouTube? Zen would like to add you to the Fish Fam Link website.
I have I sell some fish here because I got so many, but it's just a commercial site where I'm selling fish. It's not informational. I just have so many pairs of rams and apistos, and you know, I have to find them homes, to be honest with you. So it's just for that. So I don't have anything really informational. I'm working on something though. So as soon as I do, keep going back to my YouTube site, and I'll definitely update you.
Cool. What vegetables do tetras like? You discussed zucchini before, from memory. What other options do you have?
You know, that's a great question. I have seen some really cool stuff. Cucumbers, zucchini, squash. I have a bunch of autocyclists that I have to give those type of foods to, and it blows me away when I see the tetras jumping right in there too. So that's the kind of stuff that they like, the softer stuff.
Yeah. So what other fish do you keep? Obviously, you've said we've got insight of epistogrammas, rams, ottos, and pygmy cories, and the other cories that you said before. So
Cories.
what? It's sounding very South American based. What other fish do you keep in your fish room?
Currently, right now, it's not a big fish room, so it's just the rams. I have electric blue rams. I have epistogramma plumsloy, which are gorgeous. Epistogramma borellii. So not a whole lot. I love those apistos, but you know, honestly, my true love, if we want to talk about fish too, are killifish. I love killifish. There's so many beautiful types. Diapterons are beautiful. Australian rainbow fish, of course, because they're so far away from here, are beautiful. And from New Zealand, some of those rainbow fish are gorgeous. I think those are neat. But over the years, probably the fish I've spent my most time with are tetras, apistos, discus, and angelfish. Right now, I don't keep them because discus and angelfish, you need a lot of bigger tanks and filtration. And here I'm able to keep more tanks. And when you work a lot and you don't have time to be spending as much time, the smaller fish are easier to handle. So I've always liked the smaller fish.
Are you actively breeding all the small fish like your apistos and cories and stuff like that, or are they just hanging around because you like them, so to speak?
I have a disease. I can't just hang around because I like them. Any fish I get, I don't know. And especially if they go, they've never been bred before or they're impossible. That's like, yay, okay, let's go, right? You know, like to me, that's challenge accepted. So, yeah, I love a challenge. Most of the fish here, I have plans on breeding them. The autocyclists are my big challenge right now. All the other ones, I feel like eventually will happen. But the autocyclists are very common. And those are ones that break my heart because, you know, they die by the millions. Because I keep them. I'm working hard on a group of 20 I have in a 30 long. And they eat so much because they're herbivores and they poop so much. So anybody who recommends, hey, let's get some autos to clean my tank, I'm thinking, what are you thinking? Because they're going to add so much more bioload and waste to your tank. They're going to increase your algae problem because they're adding more waste and bioload to the tank. So, you know, those are the type of things, you know, that's a challenging fish, you know, because to keep a group of 20 happy, they got to eat around the clock. They're eating constantly. So I'm having to, you know, work to keep them fed and then change their water because they just poop like crazy because they're herbivores and they eat all day. So,
Helen would like to know: do the veggies need to be blanched, or can they just be thrown in raw?
Blanched is key. You got to put them in boiling water for about 30 seconds, 45 seconds. It's an art form. Dip them in there for a little bit and take them out. Don't cook them too much. They're picky. The ottos are very picky. They're very picky. I found them to be one of the more difficult fishes. You know, they're common and everybody sees them. You know, I've been keeping fish forever, and I'm going, man, these are, you know, I got to work to keep these fish. Like you said, Cam, you know, we want to do everything to keep them happy and healthy. And yeah, they require a lot of food. They require a lot of algae. You put them in an algae tank, and they'll clean it out in 24 hours. So I don't know how people can say, let's put them in a tank to keep the algae. That will be gone in 24 hours. And then what, you know? So,
yeah,
but they're dead. Sorry.
That's something that's absolutely forgotten, I think, with autocyclists, that you need to feed them. Like you have to physically feed them or they will starve because they don't have enough to eat, basically.
They're the fish I worry about the most every day. Like you said, I have to keep them fed.
So other than live foods and the vegetable matter that you're feeding, what are some of your staple pre-prepared foods that you like, and what do you look for in those foods when you're purchasing them?
That's a great question. Most of, I don't know how things are in, different countries. Obviously, here in the United States, most of the commercial food is garbage, real garbage. The tetra, all that. Yeah, it's watered down stuff. I buy from a place called kensfish.com.
Yep.
And they produce their own food. It's you can smell it. You can get flake food from the pet store, and you open the can, you can hardly smell it. You open this bag of food from Ken's Fish, and it's like, wow, the whole room smells. The ingredients are fresh. It's a difference. So it's important that you get good food to feed your fish. So important. And the funny thing is that the food's more expensive at the pet store. And I'm not saying pet store. I'm just saying, that's all that they have is to get the stuff from commercial sources. So, but there are good sources out there. So getting good food's important. Quality flake food, quality stuff. Here in the States, there's not a lot out there yet. You have to almost go out and find. I make a lot of my own food too. If I do use food, I make a beef heart mix. I mix it with fish and shrimp, and that binds it really good. And then I'll put some spirulina powder or something like that, and the fish love that. But if you can get a good thing, it's good.
I found it really hilarious when you said, like, you open up the Ken's Fish food and you can smell it and it wafts through. Last night, I fed my fish. My wife was in a totally different room. She walked into the lounge and said, "You just feed the fish, haven't you? It stinks." So I've been feeding tropical soft pellets for the fish that I've got in my lounge. And you're right. You can smell a quality food. Just what comes out of it, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Helen would like to know, have you ever kept whiptails?
Whiptail catfish, yes. The red lizard cats, the L110A, I love those. It's one of my favorite ones. They're carnivores. I have a friend of mine who breeds them, which I'm hoping to get some from him very soon. So if he's listening, I'm going to be coming to your house soon. Michael Daughtery, if you're out there, I'm coming to your house soon, my friend. But yeah, those are cool. I've never bred them before, though. Catfish and quarries, I don't have a lot of experience with those fish. But I have kept those before, and they're very similar to the autocyclists in that they need a lot of vegetables blanched. With them, too, the wood's important, too, for their digestive system. Wood's very important. And even with the autocats, I find that to be very important. I have wood in there, and they're on the wood all the time, just scraping it. And one of the research that we found in a lot of those catfish, it's not just the vegetables they eat, but there's a biofilm called off-witch. It's a German term. It's basically biological film that grows everywhere. And all those type of catfish, they eat that. That's growing everywhere. And they eat that stuff. So those are, I find those fish fascinating because, honestly, everyone's saying tetras are hard. To me, tetras are easy. But those catfish, my God, there's just so many variables to consider with them. So I find them so fascinating.
Yeah, they're very cool fish. And I totally agree with the word that I can't pronounce. It starts with A. It's the the more mature your tank is for things like autocyclists, the more success you're going to have because they've already got something to chew on to start with, and very similar to the smaller catfish and stuff like that. Where do you find all of your information other than coming directly out of your own experience? Is there some trusted websites or books that you go to on a regular basis that is your this has really helped me sort of scenario?
Yeah. That's a great question. There are a lot of and if I could send you guys the links, there's a few ichthyological sites that I could go to. You could research papers that have been written on, cardinal tetras. I mean, there's just a plethora of stuff out there. So my advice is to avoid the internet's. Most of the sites are commercial based. They're trying to sell food and equipment and so forth, and it's the motivation is to sell products, not to give information. So I find that I like to go to scientific websites, educational entities that are doing research. There's a lot of them out there. So look for ichthyology, right? That's the term, ichthyology. So look for ichthyological websites. That's where I get the part of my information. If I could just find out what the river's like, if I just know the temperatures, the water parameters, I got it. And then if I could figure out what environment they live in, it's a river system, it's a pond, it's a lake. If I can figure all that out, then I could, figure out what's happened. But then there are some great books that have been written. Dot's Aquarium in Germany has written some great material, and they're translated into English. So that's probably my primary source of stuff. I read a lot of books translated. The names, you could go on eBay and find them. You can go on eBay. It's DATZ, and then look for English translations, and there's a bunch of them. And it's breeding fish like, cardinals and rum, and it was written in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and these breeders that were meticulous and like scientists. So look for stuff like that. Really, Germany is probably our number one source of information, to be honest with you. There's just so much great material on, catfish, corridoras. England too, though. Ian Fuller in England, he's corridoras guy. He's probably the world expert on quarries. So Europe in general. Europe is where I go for my information. I love my country, great country and all, but fish science, not a lot of great information here, and a lot of false information here, to be honest.
John knows again relatively well. We've been trying to get him on with us to talk corridors, but at this point we haven't been overly lucky with that. But I'd love to have him on to speak corridors, because, like you said, I'm sure what he has forgotten is more than so many people know. Unfortunately, maybe we'll try and hopefully get that next year. We'll see how we go.
I'll show up for that. I'll be here for sure.
I think you're right. The German industry is so much more complex and detailed than probably any other industry in the world when it comes to this. Like, there's so many great resources and great fish that have come out of there. African cichlids in particular, like some of the African cichlids that come out of Germany are just phenomenal. It's just the next level, and even the hobbyists are the next level. Like the Pleco convention that gets held around in Germany and stuff. Like, it's just a bar up above over everybody. It's phenomenal what they can achieve and they have over there.
I traveled to Germany, and the pet stores there and the wholesalers there, there was a level of professional cleanliness and care for the fish. In Miami and South America, there's fish dying everywhere, and you go to Germany and it's like a laboratory, a science laboratory, and you're looking at a wholesaler. It's a different world. So definitely.
Yeah, actually, I think you can probably include a lot of European countries. I've spoken to the people from Tropical Fish Food, and they're over in Poland, and they were very much had that same sort of feel to them. And in that kind of region of the world is just next level awesomeness when it comes to the aquatic industry.
Japan too. Oh my goodness! When I started in the fish hobby years ago, Japan wasn't getting direct imports from Brazil as much as now. It's going directly to Japan, and they pay top dollar for fish. But back then they were importing them to Miami, and then from there going to Japan. That's how much money was in that too, which is crazy. The Japanese pay so much for the fish. So that was the big thing back when we started, that Europe is supplying Japan. they're great. This is a big hobby in Japan too.
Yeah, massive. You're right. Cool. So we're coming to the end of our time. I've got about 10 minutes before I've got to open up my shop.
All right.
So first of all, thank you very much for being with us. It's been phenomenal. But we like to end all of our Finatics Friday coffee date with what we call the School of Six, which is 6 very trivial, fun, short answer questions. So first of all, if you were doing a coin toss, would you do heads or tails?
Tails never fails.
That's the one. That's the one. Paper, scissors, rocks. What's your first call?
Rock.
If you could have a meal with anybody from any point in time, whether they're alive or dead, who would that be?
Winston Churchill.
Cool. Are we alone in the universe?
No, definitely not.
Are you a tea or a coffee drinker?
Oh, coffee for sure. I'm an American. We're awful here.
And what is your unicorn fish, whether that be owning, spawning, photographing, seeing in the wild? What would just be your one unicorn fish that you would love to be involved with?
Diapteron abyssinium. They're a really touchy little killifish from Central Africa. They come from really cool waters, and I am so fascinated by them because you really need to have very exact conditions to keep them. Their oxygen level for them is important. The amount of oxygen in the tank has got to be saturated, or they won't lay eggs or anything like that. So that's one of the fishes I find so fascinating. I don't have them right now because I need to set up a room where it's cool in the house and all this other stuff. So, but that's my unicorn fish for sure. And if you look them up, they're absolutely breathtaking. They really are.
I'll do that afterwards. Thank you again very much. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I have enjoyed every minute, and I think the people in the chat that have been watching have gotten so much out of this. It's greatly appreciated.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for giving up your time. It's been phenomenal. So if you haven't yet, jump on to David's YouTube channel, give him a follow. I think it sounds like there's going to be some good things to come. And yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you so much.
Cool. All right, Tim.
Take care, guys.
Have a really good day and enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend. Have a good one. Happy fish keeping. Catch you later.
Bye, guys. Thank you.